Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. "He does not want this cash," the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Coke's products without ever seeing Coke's name attached. Coke refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Coke is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Cokeland, by Christopher Leonard. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Program.
And happy Thursday. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. We've got quite a day laid out here today. Halfway through this hour, our old buddy Dianno Caldwell is going to drop by and try to explain to us how Donald Trump is just a wonderful guy and everything is fine. That should be entertaining. And in our third hour, Pramila Jayapal, the Congresswoman from Washington State, who is the co-chair, along with Mark Pocan, of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is going to drop by for 45 minutes and take calls. And then we've got a science special at the end of that hour. So there's a lot going on today. There's a couple of points that I want to bring up that I think are really, really important and consequential. And I think that most people are just kind of lost in this welter of detail and names that they're not familiar with, and who are these guys, and who is Taylor, and who's Sondland, and who's, what's going on? How did this all start with this whole Trump corruption scandal, where Giuliani is going over to Ukraine and basically executing an extortion and bribery deal on behalf of Donald Trump. And where the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has released a transcript showing that he actually told the leader of a foreign government that guy, if he wanted to have a proper integration with U.S. foreign policy, if he wanted to get along with the United States, he didn't need to talk to the State Department. He didn't need to talk to the ambassadors. He didn't need to talk to the diplomats. He needed to talk to this private lawyer, this weird guy, Rudy Giuliani, who wasn't even taking a paycheck, this buddy of Trump's. He had to talk to this guy. I mean, that's how weird it got. So how did we get here? There's a couple of players that are not being talked about pretty much at all. And I think that it's worth just laying this out so that everybody gets it, because it is so critical. So first of all, you've got President Zelensky. He's the new president of Ukraine. And he was elected in April of this year, right? Just in April. Now, the president before him was a guy named Petro Poroshenko, who was good buddies with Paul Manafort and was in tight with Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs and was, widely viewed as very corrupt. He was the previous president. And it was Poroshenko to whom Trump and Giuliani first reached out and cut a deal. Now, this goes back a little bit. But in late February, according to the Wall Street Journal, February of this year, see, Poroshenko, now, there was an election coming up in April in Ukraine. And Poroshenko is running for re-election. And he needed some help because he was falling behind in the polls because this comedian, this guy who had a TV show where he played the role of the president of Ukraine on TV as a comedian and was in tight with a billionaire oligarch, Ukrainian billionaire oligarch. This is Zelensky, the guy who played the comedian, the comedian who played president. He was in tight with the guy who owned the TV network that he was on. This guy's name is Kolomoisky, Ihor Kolomoisky. So anyhow, Poroshenko needed help in the election coming up in April. And so in February, Poroshenko meets with Lev and Igor, right? Parnas and Fruman, these two guys who got arrested, these, quote, Giuliani associates who got arrested just a couple weeks ago as they were trying to flee the United States. The two guys that Trump says, I don't know those guys. I take my picture with a lot of people. Okay, so those guys go over to Ukraine, according to the Wall Street Journal, and get a meeting with Poroshenko and put together this deal through the corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor, Poroshenko's guy, his Bill Barr, guy by the name of Lutsenko. Work out a deal with him where he will announce an investigation into Biden, into the gas company, and he will also announce an investigation into how the Democrats hacked their own server from Ukraine in 2016. So Poroshenko and his prosecutor, the former president of Ukraine and the prosecutor, the corrupt prosecutor, said to Trump, we'll give you what you want. In exchange for that, will you say something nice about us or even invite Poroshenko to the White House for a meeting? And Trump says, yeah, sure, no problem. But the meeting never happened. Poroshenko never came to the United States. But Lutsenko, the prosecutor, actually did meet with an American journalist, a guy by the name of John Solomon, who was writing for the Hill newspaper at the time. By the way, there's a great summary of this over on TPM by Josh Kovensky, the most pivotal moment in the Trump-Ukraine scandal timeline. I commend it to you, and I'm using it as a principal source. So on March 20th, this guy, John Solomon, begins publishing a series of articles in which this prosecutor for the former corrupt president is smearing our ambassador. Apparently on behalf of, we're collaborating with Giuliani. So then on April 21st, everything changes. On April 21st, Poroshenko loses the election. See, Trump thought he's got this thing all set up, and that later on this year or early next year, Poroshenko would get reelected, and that he would come out and he would announce publicly, we're investigating Joe Biden for corruption and his son, and we're also looking into how Ukrainians hacked the DNC server in 2016, had nothing to do with Russia. Trump thought that's how it was going to play out. So when Poroshenko lost to Zelensky, to the reformer, to the comedian, there was a freak out in Trump world. They were like, oh my God, this whole thing that we've put together is falling apart. And what do? And, of course, this is when Parnas and Fruman then fly to Israel for a meeting with the billionaire oligarch who owned the TV network that Zelensky was on, that President Zelensky was on. Remember, he was a comedian? Lev and Igor fly to Israel for this meeting with this billionaire under the rubric of, we're going to talk about a natural gas deal. But actually what they said was two things to this billionaire oligarch who owns this TV network in Ukraine. They said, number one, can you give us access to Zelensky, the guy who used to be on your TV network and who you support? And two, we can give you access to Trump and other U.S. officials if you give us some money. They tried to shake him down. And he basically threw them out of his office. That was in April, right after the election. So then a week later, Giuliani himself says, well, I'm going to go to Kiev. See, we've got to get this thing going, right? We've got to smear Joe Biden. And on May 9th, Giuliani told the New York Times that he was going to go to Kiev to investigate Hunter Biden and the 2016 election. And as soon as the New York Times published that, there was this big Sturm und Drang around this, and Giuliani said, I guess I'm not going to go. But, the bottom line is that these guys were absolutely planning on having this deal worked out with Poroshenko, and it just completely caught them off guard. So they had to improvise with a guy who wasn't inclined to be corrupt. Now, in the end, he was willing, Zelensky, he ultimately, for the survival of his country, in his mind, certainly for the survival of his presidency, decided that he was willing to go along with Trump's little extortion scam and bribery scam. And he scheduled a meeting with CNN to be interviewed about it, at which he would, at which time he would basically say, yeah, we're looking into the corruption by Joe and Hunter Biden, and we're looking into whether the Ukrainians actually hacked the DNC in 2016, rather than the Russians or somebody else. And that got blown up when the whistleblowers' information came out. And then 2 days later, Trump released the aid to Ukraine, because he basically, at that point, he had been outed. Trump had been outed, so he had to release that money. So, I think it's really important to just understand the context of this whole thing, to look back at it and see how it's working, see where it came from, and see how, this was like a corrupt president, Trump, reaching out to the corrupt president of another country, Poroshenko in Ukraine, working out a deal that fell apart when Poroshenko lost the election. That's the bottom line, right? That's the whole thing in summary.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Which then led us to where we are right now, where, he had to reach out to the new president. And that's when things got really unraveled, and Rick Perry and Gordon Sondland and all these guys get involved. And welcome back. Manuel in Houston, Texas. Hey, Manuel, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Love your show. It's been a while since I called in. Anyway, see if I can say this without losing track. I just think it's ironic how this criminal that we got in the White House, of course I'm biased, the same Constitution that he's violating, that he swore to uphold, that he's violating, is protecting him. I think that's ironic, that through this hearing, this impeachment inquiry.
Yeah.
And I'm all for the impeachment inquiry. But, it's ironic to me that the same Constitution, I'm repeating, that he is violating is also, in essence, protecting him, because he's the president. Any other body in a corporation or somebody will be removed or something, or censored or something.
Yeah.
And then another thing I want to say, the same Constitution that he swore to uphold, he's basically calling him phony. Because in my opinion, if you call one phase of the Constitution phony, you're basically saying that the whole Constitution is
What
phony.
part of the Constitution, Manuel, is he saying is phony?
The Emoluments Clause.
Oh, the Emoluments Clause, yeah. Well, also, I would say, you know, the power of Congress. He is refusing to respond to congressional subpoenas for information, which is why, you know, the primary witnesses are not in front of Congress. We're getting secondary witnesses. This is the whole Republican talking point. Well, that's because they're being obstructed. And Andrew Johnson turned over information Congress asked for in 1860, whatever it was, 67, I think. Richard Nixon turned over information Congress asked for, ultimately. I mean, Bill Clinton turned over information that Congress asked for. But Donald Trump is completely obstructing Congress, and that's, you know, and impeachment is a congressional obligation. If Congress sees that a president is committing high crimes or misdemeanors, bribery or treason, they have an obligation to impeach him, and that obligation really went up substantially back in 1974 when the Office of Legal Counsel in the U.S. Department of Justice, you know, wrote this memo saying that you can't prosecute a sitting president. And then in 2000, when the Bill Clinton Office of Legal Counsel said yes, and we agree, and doubled down on that. Well, if you can't prosecute him, literally the only thing that is left if he's committing a crime is impeachment. And so Congress has, I mean, this becomes not just something Congress can do if they choose to. This becomes like a solemn obligation. If the Constitution really is the supreme law of the land, and and this is one of the reasons why, and I agree with you, Emmanuel, about emoluments, and this is why I think that the Democrats, if they only impeach him for this Ukraine deal, I think that's a very dangerous course, and I think it's a bad precedent, because I really think they should list all the crimes this man committed, just like they did with Richard Nixon. And
Amen.
But instead, it looks like, I mean, I'm not sure that they've made the final decision yet, but it looks like they're just going to go for this bribery extortion thing, which is terrible. I mean, you know, it's really terrible. Yeah. But, you know, all of history needs to know that we hold presidents accountable when they do these kind of things. I mean, you know, all of history needs to understand this. It's you know, future presidents need to understand this. So,
well, I appreciate you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Manuel. Nice to hear from you. We'll be back in just a minute. It's 21 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back. Program. You can find it over at Thom Hartmann. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the
because
court.
I think a lot of people just don't know
the hidden history of the Supreme Court. They're not paying close attention to what's going on, but how we got here, right? And that is that, you know, Trump already had this deal with the corrupt former president. A new guy comes in and says, in fact, campaigns on, I'm going to be the guy who cleans up the corruption. The new guy comes in, and so Trump reaches out to him through Giuliani and Sondland and Perry and says, hey, would you cut the deal with us that the previous guy did? I mean, I don't think most Americans even know that there was a previous deal that Trump had cut with Poroshenko. Most Americans obviously don't even know who Poroshenko is, and this is a problem. There's another point I want to make, and then I'm going to get to your phone calls after the break at the bottom of the hour, but there's another point that I think is a really important one. There's a really simple reason why back in 1974 there were some Republicans who actually voted to investigate Richard Nixon. In fact, there were only 4 people who voted not to investigate Richard Nixon in the U.S. House of Representatives. Only 4. They were all Republicans, but there were only 4 of them. Now, why is it that back in 1974, and what Nixon is accused of doing, trying to cover up a break-in to the DNC, we're spying on the other party, is nothing compared to bribery and extortion of a foreign government in order to flip an election. I mean, they were both trying to flip an election, right? Nixon was trying to bug the Democrats so that he could get information on what their strategy was. He actually was trying to find, I believe that he was trying to find out if they knew what Lyndon Johnson knew, that in the election of 68, Richard Nixon, when he first became president in 1968, that he had committed treason by cutting a deal with South Vietnam to not go along with the peace deal that LBJ had worked out. And that was what he wanted to find out. He needed to find out if the Democrats knew about this, and that's why, in my opinion, they were breaking into Watergate. But whatever. In both cases, you've got a Republican president who is using criminality, essentially, to become, to get reelected. This is what Nixon was doing within the election of 72 by breaking into the Watergate. And this is what Trump is doing right now, in 2019, 2020 election cycle, trying to get the Ukrainians to work with him. But why is it that today no Republicans have broken rank with Trump yet? And the only one who has, Justin Amash, left the party. I think it's because of the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'm not talking about putting conservatives on the court. I'm talking about in 1976 and 1978. Now, this was 2 and 4 years after the Nixon impeachment. The U.S. Supreme Court said it is perfectly fine. It's no longer considered bribery when an individual billionaire or corporation reaches out to an individual politician and says, we would like to own you. We will give you hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, both professionally and personally, if you will be our guy. And in 76 and 78, the Supreme Court said to billionaires in 76 and to corporations in 78, that is First Amendment protected free speech. You spending money to own people is no longer considered bribery. So now the situation that we have is that the entire Republican Party have become wholly owned agents of the corporate and billionaire class. And they don't want the money to stop. And Trump is doing what the billionaires and the corporations want, deregulation and lower taxes. This is their entire agenda. It's really that simple. And as long as the Supreme Court continues to say it's okay for billionaires and corporations, for the oil industry to own some of the Republicans and the pharmaceutical industry to own some of the Republicans, as long as the Supreme Court goes on to say that and the morbidly rich can continue to own politicians, we're going to continue to see this partisanship. Everybody's walking around going, why are we so partisan? There's a very simple reason. It's the Supreme Court.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your calls right after the break. John in New York says this is going to get Trump elected. We'll see. Actually, Gianna Caldwell is going to be with us, too. Well, yeah, after the break. Stick around. Our book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how can we... The new book, Taken for Granted, How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed. His website, GiannoCaldwell.com, G-I-A-N-N-O Caldwell, C-A-L-D-W-E-L-L. That's also his Twitter handle, Gianno Caldwell. And I should add, Gianno is a friend of mine. Gianno, welcome back to the program. It's been too long since we've talked.
It's been way too long, and I'm so happy to come talk to you about this book, which, interestingly enough, has been endorsed by President Trump, Ann Coulter, Ben Shapiro, Newt Gingrich, Kiko James, the president of Heritage, and Clarence Cox III, who's the former president of a law enforcement group. And I'm sure your name is going on that list very soon here, Tom.
Okay, so how do you think that conservatism can win back the Americans that liberalism failed, the subtitle of your book, when the head of your party is extorting a foreign government to try to get to try to help himself get reelected in 2020? How do you pull that off?
So first and foremost, let me tell my story, and I talk about this in my book, Taken for Granted. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, extremely poor, lights, gas, and water off at the same time. Mom addicted to crack cocaine. I got involved in politics when I was 14 years old, and that happened because I was going down a street with my grandfather driving through an area of Chicago called Inglewood one day, and I saw a lady who looked drugged up and beat down, and I knew it was my mother. I began to tear up. My grandfather, in his very southern voice, says, "What's wrong with you, boy?" And I say, "This lady." And then I realized it wasn't my mother, but it could have been. I said, "What can I do to prevent this from happening?" And he begins to tell me about the power elected officials have to increase the penalty of lawful of those who sell and distribute drugs, and how they can provide grant funding for those who want to be rehabilitated. Then I got involved in politics at the age of 14. And I saw how year after year Democrats would come into this community that I lived and all over the city of Chicago and make these promises, but nothing would ever change. Meanwhile, you got black unemployment the highest it had ever been. You got crime running rampant through the streets, drug dealing. You got all these policies, the government-backed policies, which are meant to keep people trapped in where they are.
Well, hang on just a second, Gianno. The LBJ's Great Society programs cut over the following 10 years, before they were largely repealed by Reagan, cut poverty in half in the United States. And I believe that they cut black poverty by more than in half. But I know for a fact that it was in the neighborhood of the high 40% of people were literally no longer in poverty as a result of those programs, because of housing programs, because of food stamps, because of support to education, because of tax credit programs. I mean, there's just a whole plethora of programs. I get it that both Republican and Democratic politicians have, to a large extent, failed our cities over the years, but I don't see how this is conservative or liberal. Let's
be very clear. I support a strong safety net. I just support it from a temporary standpoint. In the neighborhoods I lived in, it was generational. This wasn't you're on the program for a couple years.
But don't you think that's because Wells Fargo was redlining every opportunity? Don't you think that was because the big employers in Chicago were not hiring black people? In fact, you could even argue back up until the 60s that even unions were keeping black people out. And, there's a conservative talking point for you if you want. But I mean, that's racism. That's not politics.
Unions have disenfranchised African Americans 100%, but we're talking about policies that were pushed by liberal politicians, which causes people to capitulate to poverty. We're talking about you talk about.
So how does cutting somebody off of their Medicaid, their access to health care, you think that's going to cause them to suddenly say, gee, I think I should, go out there and get a job, when there's no job for them to get?
When Newt Gingrich put forth the 96 welfare reform, I thought that was great. You get people, you let them stay on welfare for a little bit, allow them to get a job or go to school, and then at some particular point you take them off, but you get them comfortable.
Yeah, it was a 5-year limit, but where that has failed, and we're seeing this We're seeing this with we've got higher maternal and infant mortality rates in our inner cities in the United States and in southern rural areas, in red state rural areas. We've got higher infant mortality rates than most third world countries.
You know what we also have? We have the highest employment that we've ever seen in our country, just about, especially for African Americans, the lowest unemployment rate in our country's history, at least where it was recorded. We got the Black Americans are doing extraordinarily well.
I agree. President Obama's policies have done really well.
No,
and now we're in the sixth year or the 10th year.
Bureau of Labor and Statistics did a study from 2016, the last year of President Obama's term in office, up until now. There's been over 1.3 million jobs added for Black Americans. You think about criminal justice reform, thousands of people released from jail, 90% of them are Black. You think about opportunity zones, almost 9,000 of them in Black marginalized zip codes where companies can come in and invest. You think about greater funding for HBCUs.
You're talking about all things that Bill Clinton supported and Barack Obama supported, Gianno.
I'm talking. No, I'm not.
But you haven't answered my question. How can conservatives
supported low unemployment for Black people? They just never did anything to cause it to happen. Sure.
Okay. How can conservatives win when the head of their party, and we've only got we've got a few minutes here left, I guess, to talk. But how can conservatives win when the head of their party is a corrupt hustler who refuses to show his taxes, who cheated on both of his last two wives, who paid cover-up hush money to a porn star and a Playboy model, before an election, who's committed these crimes? How can you possibly win with this guy at the head of the ticket?
You know what's interesting? I'm not familiar with there being a such thing as a perfect person. Certainly, he has his flaws, his moral failings. That's 100% accurate. However, I'm talking about from a policy perspective.
I'm talking criminal failings.
Well, first and foremost, if that was something that was to be proven, then he would be in handcuffs right now. That's not something to be proven.
Well, no, according to the Department of Justice, he can't be arrested. He has to be impeached, which is actually what's going on right now.
Right. And you read the transcript, didn't you?
I did, where he nakedly told Lucenska, what's his name?
Where's the evidence? Where was it? They said it was a quid pro quo.
Zelensky.
Did you see that? I didn't.
Yeah, Zelensky said, "Hey, we're ready to buy some missiles," and Trump said, "But I want a favor, though."
No, but they got their funding. He never made a statement.
They got their funding 2 days after the whistleblower's story got leaked to the New York Times.
But they still got their funding.
They got their funding because Trump couldn't run his con anymore.
Let's keep in mind, President Obama held up funding for 8 years? He sent them blankets and food.
This is not about Obama, and Obama wasn't trying to do anything with Ukraine in order to get himself reelected. Obama wasn't corruptly committing extortion. You may disagree with Obama's foreign policy with regard to Ukraine.
Let me ask you this: Do you think Joe Biden's son was corrupted?
I don't think
that going to sit on a board with no experience.
I think it's a terrible thing.
All this money.
I don't think he should have done it. I think it's a terrible thing. But that's not what this
should have pushed it either, right? Saying I'm gonna fire the prosecutor.
Good job at trying to change the subject, but the bottom line here, Gianno, is that we've got a president who's committing extortion right out in front of God and the whole world.
If it was extortion, it would hold up in a court of law, and he would be in handcuffs.
Well, he would not be in handcuffs. The Department of Justice has said he can't be arrested.
Impeachment is a political process, and if anybody saw that hearing yesterday, because I sat for mostly 5 hours of that, I didn't hear anybody with direct evidence or who actually heard this president say, I want you to do something
and you know why that is?
For political. Why is that?
Because unlike Bill Clinton, unlike Richard Nixon, and unlike Andrew Johnson, this president has refused to answer lawfully issued federal subpoenas. He is engaged in a massive cover-up of his own criminal doings.
About for his tax returns?
No, I'm talking about subpoenas for example, for John Bolton to come in and testify. There's
this thing called executive privilege. President Obama.
This is not about executive privilege. Executive privilege does not cover crimes. The Supreme Court ruled that in '74.
This isn't a crime. You're talking about John Bolton testifying. I'm saying that executive privilege.
You can no, seriously. As a matter of fact and law, you can't assert executive privilege in an impeachment hearing. You can't. Richard Nixon tried, and the Supreme Court said, "Sorry, that doesn't work."
So I'm gonna tell you again, because we've talked about this all on there, and for people that know, I work for Fox News Channel. This president, and if you saw the hearing, if people sat in and they listened to what they had to say, there was no one with any direct evidence of President Trump's wrongdoing. It was
because Trump is hiding it.
This person told me, this person, this person, this person. We don't know, and I'm all for if the president did something wrong, and if he's corrupted, yes, he should be brought to justice. We got to hold our party accountable. I talk about that in my book, Taken for Granted, and I encourage everybody to go out and look it up, go get it, and follow me on social media, Instagram, Twitter, at Dianno Caldwell, Gianno Caldwell, Caldwell, and I'm sure you're going to put this
.com
and riveting,
and also on your Twitter feed. Yeah, you know, and I'm sure we'll post this on YouTube and everything. And your book, Taken for Granted: How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed, is a book that people should be reading. I
I'm
agree.
not running away. I just got to go on air right now.
Okay, you got a boogie.
We got, you know, and I want to mention something real quick. You may not recall. You here?
Yeah, I'm listening.
The day that Trump announced for president, I sat on your air on RT America, and you said that you thought that Trump had a chance to win.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Gianno Caldwell, Fox News political analyst and author of the new book, Taken for Granted: How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed. GiannoCaldwell.com and on Twitter, Gianno Caldwell. Thanks, Gianno. Thanks for dropping by today.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Ernest in Santa Monica, listening on KPFK in Los Angeles. Hey, Ernest, what's on your mind today?
How are you, sir? Good morning. Thank you for taking the call. I am just saying, so I'm losing faith in the Democratic Party. I'm losing faith in DNC. I think the race to impeachment, while it might be well-intentioned, I think it's, for me personally on the outside looking in, I think it's a sham. I think it's a farce. Because at the end of the day, when it hits the Senate's desk, they're not going to toss him out on his butt because they're the Republican Party and they control it.
So if the next president is Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, and they decide that when they want to run for re-election in 2024, that it would be really helpful if, say, France was to support us and dig up some dirt on Mitt Romney when he runs, and so they go to the French intelligence services and say, hey, we've got some dirt on your president. We know that he's been having an affair on the side. We're going to release this if you won't investigate Mitt Romney and announce it. You think that's fine, Ernest?
Funds, as I believe, as I've looked into it, I think funds were released within 10 or 11 days.
The funds were released 2 days after the New York Times reported that the whistleblower had told the world, or had told Congress, actually, through the State Department's Inspector General.
Right.
2 days after 2 days after the New York Times reported that the president was trying to commit extortion against Ukraine, and the key to that was withholding the funds. 2 days after that was reported, he released the money.
Right.
That's proof of guilt.
That. Money was released. That's the end of the day. That's what you're telling me. Money was released. What's the issue here? Are you telling me that
so Ernest, let me get this straight.
Never engaged?
No, let me get this straight. So if I walk into a bank and I stick a gun in the face of the teller and I say, give me all your hundreds, and they're handing the hundreds across, and they're about halfway across, but I haven't grabbed them yet, and then the cop in the bank comes over and puts a gun to me and says, stop it now, and I set my gun down and say, hey, I haven't taken the money yet. The money's back in the teller's drawer. Everything's good.
The real reason.
Go ahead, Ernest.
The real reason the DNC is going to lose the vote of the American people is because they're wasting political capital, they're wasting time, they're wasting energy instead of legislating.
I think that's a strong possible argument, and you may well be right, except for the fact that the Democrats in the House of Representatives have passed more than 260 consequential pieces of legislation. They've cleaned up our elections. They've nailed down our elections to make things so that foreign governments can't hack our elections like they have in the past. They passed comprehensive health insurance. Expanded Medicaid across the country. They cleaned up our environment.
I appreciate that.
done over 260 pieces of legislation. It's not that the Democrats are not legislating. They are doing it every day. It's that Mitch McConnell, you're saying that the Democrats are going to lose because Mitch McConnell is blocking all this legislation in the Senate.
The Democrats are going to lose because if you look at the 2008 election, Mitt Romney versus now 2016 Trump, Mitt Romney got 1% more of the white vote. Trump got 1% more of the white vote. Trump took over, in comparison, 14% more of the Asian vote. Latino vote. Trump, on a campaign of build a wall, build a wall, he won 23% of the vote. That's a problem.
Yeah, you got those numbers right at your fingertips there, Ernest. Calling me out of the RNC headquarters. Ernest, thanks a lot for the call. No, I believe you are who you say you are. I'm sorry, that was snarky. I shouldn't get personal. Ernest, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I appreciate it. And thanks for listening to KPFK. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So is this all helping or hurting? This, pointing out to the world that Donald Trump appears to have committed some serious crimes. John in New York City, listening on Sirius XM. John, you think that this is going to get Trump reelected?
It's not resonating well with the American people. Basically, I think the Democrats understand they can't beat him. This is a last-ditch effort. I also think that they're trying to posture for the upcoming indictments that are going to come down regarding Hillary and Obama and what they played into the Ukraine debacle. And it's just a matter of time. Trump will win in 2020, and you're going to see people in handcuffs. I guarantee you that.
Yeah, you may be right, John. I'm fascinated by this. We know that Trump cut a deal with Poroshenko, the former corrupt president, and that in April of this year, when Lysenko got elected, the non-corrupt guy, that's when they started scrambling, Rudy and Perry and Sondland, trying to cut the similar deal with the new guy. But what is the deal with Ukraine that you think Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are going to go to jail for?
Well, I don't think per se that those two powerful people will go to jail. I mean,
you said they're going to be in handcuffs. What'd they do? What'd they do wrong?
The dossier is gonna come out with who was behind it, and it's gonna lead to Obama and Hillary.
Are you talking about the Christopher Steele dossier, the one that was initially hired by the Washington Examiner, I believe it was? It's the right-wing newspaper in Washington D.C. And then on behalf of
that's not the right spin.
It's actually what happened though. It was on behalf, I believe, of the Marco Rubio campaign. Initially funded that dossier.
Stop taking the same medication. Stop taking the same medication that Adam Schiff is taking, because it's not reality. Okay, listen.
So what's reality? I'm asking you. Tell me, what did Obama and Clinton do that's going to get them thrown in jail?
Exactly what they're accusing Trump of: meddling in an election and using people to try to unseat a person who's running for office. It's to point the fingers because it's exactly what the Democrats
Okay, let me get this straight. John, let me tell you what I think you're saying. I think you're saying that because Christopher Steele worked for British intelligence in a previous, before he retired and became a private investigator, that because he's British,
that a political party or a political campaign hiring him, a Brit, not an American, to investigate a candidate, Donald Trump, is the same thing as the President of the United States committing extortion against a foreign government. But Christopher Steele is not a foreign government.
You're labeling it as extortion. You're labeling it as extortion.
Yeah,
Nobody else is.
Sure, I'm labeling it as extortion. You're labeling it as a good deal. I get that. That's fine. But, you know, what Trump did was tried to get a foreign government to basically meddle in our election. What Clinton did after she picked up this dossier, from, I think it was the Marco Rubio campaign, you know, after he dropped out. I mean, it was one of the Republican candidates. It might have been Ted Cruz, but I'm pretty sure it was Marco Rubio who initially had hired this thing. But what Clinton did was hired a private detective to do research. There's, to the best of my knowledge, no law against that. There is a law against having foreign governments interfere in elections. Christopher Steele did not work for the British government at the time that happened.
Right,
he was a private eye.
Hillary should be in jail. Hillary should be in jail because she interfered with the Russian elections while she was in the Department of State. That's a known fact.
Well,
why do you think Putin went after her?
She absolutely did. Yeah, sure. As Secretary of State, you know, I agree, and I understand. But that's not illegal. That was the U.S. foreign policy. That was our policy set by Congress and by the president out in the open. Our policy.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was.
That was a rogue move by Hillary Clinton, and Putin played her one better, and he's part of the reason she was not elected, and it must burn her daily because she played with the big boys, and the big boys slapped her down.
I agree. That
agree.
Russian involvement in our election helped put Donald Trump in the White House. Doesn't it concern you, though, that the guy in the White House was put there by a foreign government?
Do I think he was?
No, you just said he was. I'm asking, doesn't that concern you, though? I mean, you know, what if the next president is put into place by Turkey or by Iran?
I don't view Russia as this huge enemy that America portrays.
By and large, John, I don't either. I think that we should have good relations with Russia. I want us to have good relations with Russia. We're the two largest nuclear powers in the world. I'm all in favor of that.
And why is the world?
That's not the point here. I'm still trying to figure out why you think that what Obama and Clinton did, which was the official policy of the United States, is going to get them put in jail, whereas what Trump did, which was to violate the official policy of the United States. The official policy of the United States is that we oppose foreign governments involving themselves in our elections, and Trump tried to get a foreign government.
Policy.
Of course it is.
It's not the official policy of the United States government. Just let me finish. I let you speak.
Sure.
To use the FBI and the CIA to go after Donald Trump. And they went after him, and it's been proven, okay? James Clapper and the rest of Comey and all the other dirtbags that are around them. They did
start an investigation. You're absolutely right, John. They did look into it.
It hasn't been finished yet.
And according to them, they were trying to find out if a foreign government was trying to corrupt the Trump campaign. And little did they know that the Trump campaign was trying to get a foreign government to participate in our election. But yeah, John, thank you for the call. It's a fascinating insight into Trump world. I really appreciate it. It's 57 minutes past the hour, coming up on 58 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in our next hour. We'll just, let's have a conversation here about what's going on. We've got some science stuff for you. By the way, there was a school shooting, another one in Santa Clarita, California this morning. I'll bring you up to date on that, too, when we come back from the break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study, and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine were for 20 years, where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than DeVoto. DeVoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote DeVoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 2 or 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, DeVoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. DeVoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified
assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit Devoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western Caucasus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Timeline, April of this year. That's when President Poroshenko lost the election and President Zelensky won. And the deal that Trump had already negotiated with the former president of Ukraine fell apart. And he needed to scramble to get a new deal with the current president of Ukraine, which is where, how we ended up where we are right now. Also, five people are injured in a shooting in Los Angeles at a high school, not Los Angeles specific, it's Santa Clarita, it's just north of Los Angeles. They described a man dressed in black clothing as the shooter. They said he's in custody and being treated at a local hospital. This was at 7:38 this morning. The hospital's reporting 3 of the wounded are in critical condition. 1 is in good condition. 2 students told CNN during an on-air interview that they heard 5 shots, 1 initial bang followed by 4 other rapid shots. This is Saugus High has 2,400 students. So, I'll keep you up to date on this, but it's just another one. I mean, I don't mean just, but here we go again. And will Mitch McConnell not allow, the Democrats passed legislation in the House of Representatives to ban assault weapons, to institute background checks for all purchases, to close the gun show loophole. Very simple, straightforward legislation that is supported by the majority of Republicans and over 80% of Americans overall. The Democrats passed that legislation last year. And that legislation, or this year, they passed that legislation this year. And that legislation is sitting in the Senate waiting for Mitch McConnell to authorize a hearing on it, a discussion of it. As we have another school shooting, Mitch McConnell, Massacre Mitch, is refusing to allow that legislation to go forward. And that's pretty astonishing. We haven't had an opportunity to talk since yesterday when the hearings were going down. It was a a pretty interesting and consequential day. I think probably the largest news that was made. I mean, we all knew that Trump was basically saying to a foreign government, you need to corruptly open an investigation, a sham investigation into Joe Biden and his son. See, they've actually already been investigated. Both the Ukraine and the U.S. State Department looked into Hunter Biden being on the board of that gas company, and both concluded that, it might look bad, that the son of the president or vice president is, got a cushy job, but there's nothing illegal going on here. Now, I agree it looks bad. Hunter Biden should have had better judgment. But, what can you say? Stuff happens. But, Trump bending foreign policy like that, so I think we all kind of know the contours of the story broadly. But the big thing that was announced yesterday was that on July 26th, now keep in mind, on July 25th was the day that Trump, in the phone call, said to the current president of Ukraine, the reformer, the guy who wanted to actually clean up real corruption, that Trump said on the phone to this guy, after Zelensky said, hey, and we're ready to buy those missiles that can stop Russian tanks. We're ready to buy those. And the response from Donald Trump was, but I'd like a favor, though. I want you to talk to Rudy Giuliani, my personal lawyer, who's not a representative of our government, but is working on my political campaign. And I'd like you to work some stuff out with Rudy Giuliani that has to do with Joe and Hunter Biden, who were mentioned by name in this telephone call, and the 2016 election and CrowdStrike, this American company that looked at the DNC server and said, aha, you've been hacked by the Russians. And the new theory is that somehow CrowdStrike lied about that, and in fact, that the DNC was hacked by Ukrainians. And so Trump, Trump says this. So that was on July 25th. The next day, on July 26th, and this was a piece of information that Mr. Taylor testified to yesterday. He said that a member of his staff was sitting in a restaurant with Gordon Sondland, the Portland, Oregon hotel millionaire, multimillionaire, who gave $1 million to Donald Trump, or to his inaugural balls and things, in exchange for the ambassadorship to the European Union. That Gordon Sondland was sitting in the restaurant with this guy, and he made a phone call to Donald Trump to bring him up to date and to say, yeah, it looks like the Ukrainians are going to go along with the investigations. And this guy could hear Trump saying it. Now, as of this moment, that's secondhand information, but the guy who heard the information is going to be testifying before Congress, behind closed doors, either this afternoon or tomorrow. Pretty sure it's tomorrow morning, but I could be wrong on that. There are so many moving pieces, and I don't have the story right in front of me. But this week, they're going to hear from him. So I'm guessing that he'll be scheduled as a public witness next week. So, we'll see where this goes. Donald Trump has lost his appeal to keep his taxes hidden from New York State. 8 years of taxes. A judge for the U.S. For the D.C. Circuit said, no, you have to turn over your tax returns. Sorry, that's the law. This is an actual criminal investigation by the state of New York. You got to turn over your tax returns, just like any other citizen. So he appealed that to the entire, to a 3-judge tribunal or panel at the D.C. Circuit. And 2 of the 3 judges said, sorry, Charlie. And so then he appealed, you got to turn over your taxes. So then he said, will the entire D.C. Circuit, all 11 or 13 or however many judges there are in that circuit, will you all hear it? And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And actually, the 3 appellate judges who said we should hear it, it was an 8-3 vote. So it's 11 judges. They said, no, we're not going to hear it. And the 3 judges who said we should hear it were all Republican appointees, 2 of them appointed by Trump, and those 2 previously worked in the Trump administration, so they worked for Donald Trump. They should have recused themselves because they were ruling on their old employer. I mean, the other guy who was a Republican appointee, even if he had been appointed by Trump, if he didn't work for Trump, I don't think it would make a difference. So anyhow, Trump says he's now going to appeal this to the U.S. Supreme Court. He has 7 days to file those appeals. Meanwhile, I was getting just inundated with emails from Donald Trump during the hearings yesterday, and I just wanted to share some of them with you. These are his emails to his big donor, Fred Flintstone. Fred, Democrats will do whatever it takes to erase your voice, erase your vote, and erase your freedom. Keep in mind, I was pointing out a couple of days ago how good social science studies find that if you can make people fearful, their politics shift conservative. If you can make people feel safe, their politics shift liberal. It's the biggest single variable. So if an authoritarian, if a conservative wants to get reelected, what does he have to do? Make people feel fearful. Fred, Democrats will do whatever it takes to erase your voice, erase your vote, and erase your freedom. These impeachment hearings are a total scam and just a political hit job on President Trump. They simply don't care about you. They don't care that you, in all caps, elected President Trump because you were tired of the endless corruption and lies coming from crooked Hillary and the Democrats. They don't care that they're wasting millions of your taxpayer dollars on yet another impeachment witch hunt after their Russian witch hunt failed. All they care about is beating President Trump. It's up to you to make sure that never happens, Fred. There's never been a more critical time to step up and defend President Trump than right now. He has noticed your name is missing from the group of patriots that stood up during these fake impeachment hearings. Do you stand with the president in this fight? Please contribute $45 in the next 24 hours to stand with President Trump during these fake impeachment hearings, and your contribution will be double matched. Okay, first I got that. Then I got this about 4 hours later. Fred, the Democrats have reached a new low. Adam Schiff is lying to the American people every single day and has yet to be held accountable. There's bullet points in all caps or in bold type. He coordinated with a whistleblower. He lied about his involvement with the whistleblower. He misrepresented President Trump's Ukraine call. He excluded President Trump's lawyers from the inquiry, and he prevented Republican witnesses from testifying. If today's fake impeachment hearings show one thing, it's that this whole sham is a continuation of the Democrats' political vendetta against President Trump that began the day he was elected. The left will never rest until they impeach your president. We know that will never happen, and it's time to make a statement to Nancy and Adam Schiff to call it off for good. President Trump wants to raise $3 million in 24 hours. This goal is so important that he's authorized a special triple match on all donations. Please contribute $45 right now and help us crush our $3 million goal, and your gift will be triple matched. And so then this one came in this morning. Fred, did you watch yesterday's fake impeachment hearings? It was absolutely ridiculous. Did Adam Shifty Schiff and the rest of the radical Democrats even read the transcript before they went to work yesterday? If they had, they would have called off this witch hunt trial because I did nothing wrong. Where is the due process? It's so simple. Just read the transcript. I cannot sit by and let this happen, Fred. As a true American patriot, you cannot sit by and let this happen, Fred. That's why I'm calling on my top supporters like Fred Flintstone in Oregon to stand up and make a statement so huge and so epic that the Democrats will lose, period. Their, period. Minds, period. I met with Brad yesterday to go over the fundraising numbers, and we crushed our $3 million goal. I now realize that $3 million wasn't enough. We need to do something incredible to end this once and for all. I've decided to raise the goal to $5 million. This goal is so critical that I've spoken with a group of donors, and they've agreed to raise their original match to a triple match on all contributions. Note, if you've saved your payment information, your donation will go through immediately. Please contribute $45 by midnight tonight. You kind of get the idea. So that's what's going on. Anyhow, let's talk about what happened yesterday. And, just this whole issue broadly. I'll pick up your calls right after the break here. It's 18 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Professor, I got me a $45 check.
You're ready to go to the president, right?
No. Actually, it's a check from Melania Trump, and then for $45, and then I match it with my $45. And I've got the information here in front of me. Now,
Are you serious?
I'm not kidding you. I used to be a registered Republican. I guess it's out there now.
Wow.
I'm a principal guy, so I ain't got.
So this is they mailed you this.
They mailed me this. I got the check. It's $45. It's what is it? Support for President Trump's agenda, and it's from Melania Trump. And you got a picture of her, standing behind her husband and behind the president. And here's the catcher. You can go up to $5,000, right? But let me read what it says. It's contributions to the Republican National Committee are not deductible for federal income tax purposes.
Right.
So they got that out there. But that's not why. When you started talking about that, I thought, oh my Lord, I got some from them folks too. But what I wanted to say was, this impeachment situation that's going on, I think it's a smart move. I'm going to tell you why I think it's a smart move the way they're doing it.
Okay.
This is a situation of intent to withhold, to compromise, what Congress decided to do. Intent. What was the man's intent? When used to be when I went to school, they would say that when the Supreme Court would review a law, they would say, well, what was the intent of Congress? Remember those days? Things have changed since you and I were kids. But so what was the president's intent? His intent was to withhold, busted cold turkey. Now, the reason why they got to go with this Ukraine thing is a solo sin, because, see, the Democrats got clean hands on this one. They've got some problems in Ukraine, but they don't have any problems with withholding. Compromising the intent of Congress. So that's a blessing. And why do you say, well, why don't they go after this man because of the emoluments clause? Because the Democrats have fiscal skeletons too, Professor. And it reminds me of a guy named Wilbur Mills. Remember him?
Oh yeah. He used to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, a Republican way back in the day, right? Or no?
He was the chairperson of the Ways and Means Committee.
That's right. Thank you.
Now, Wilbur Means was a bad man. Now, we have all this stuff now that we're going through now, but the guy who's head of the Ways and Means Committee, he hasn't filed his taxes either.
In fact, wasn't it Wilbur Mills who got busted with Fanny, what's her name, that exotic dancer in quotes?
Look at my boy here. See, that's why you're the professor. Of course, a lot of people can't remember last week. The answer is yes, sir. That is correct.
Okay.
But
Fanny Fox.
I believe that. Anyway, the Democratic Convention, I believe it's going to be the biggest help to Donald Trump is going to be what comes out of the Democratic Convention, straight up. And let me tell you why I'm going there with this. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, right? She got a little thing going on in D.C. along with some Republicans where they're trying to support a government in Venezuela to oppose Maduro, right? So the people from Black Lives Matter were down there, with their signs. They got arrested and all that other good stuff. The lady who started Black Lives Matter had 5 cop cars come up to her house to try to arrest her. She asked for a warrant. They didn't have no warrant, so they let her go. The point I'm trying to make is...
That happened to Medea Benjamin, too. I got an email yesterday. She got, they came and busted in her door because she'd been part of this protest.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, but I couldn't...
It was Code Pink. Code Pink. Actually, it wasn't Black Lives Matter, it was Code Pink. Medea started Code Pink. But they're associated. I mean, the two of them work together.
Amen. So there it is. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot, Morris. Good to hear from you. And Wilbur Mills, man, I haven't even thought about Wilbur Mills in 25 years. I guess we're all dating ourselves. 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers.
America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Cliff in Santa Clarita. Oh my, that's where the school shooting is going on.
Good morning, Fred.
Good morning, Cliff. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, listen, I've been living in Santa Clarita for almost 30 years, and I've been watching the local news coverage of the school shooting. It was a 15-year-old student that did the shooting, and he's in custody. I guess I don't know if he shot him or they beat him up, but he's in the hospital at Henry Mayo. There's 6 to 7 victims. One female has died, and there's 2 males in critical condition.
Oh my.
I think the rest are not life-threatening. But, you know, this is a really safe neighborhood. I mean, there's a lot of sheriffs and police that work here but also live in the community. It's always rated up in the top 5 or 10 cities in the country as far as safety. But honestly, Tom, I'm not that surprised this has happened because it's a really red district. This is actually the district that Katie Hill represented until she just had to resign because of the, you know, you were familiar with the Congress.
Yeah, because of the revenge porn pictures. Yeah.
Exactly. And Steve Knight, the Republican who she defeated, is apparently back in the running to take her seat. So we're going to, you know, possibly.
Is he an NRA toady, Cliff?
Of course.
So that's probably going to be a challenge for him going into an election right after a major school shooting in the district.
Logically, you would think that, but out here, I don't even think it's going to be a problem for him. I really don't.
Amazing.
It is. And, the administration won't do anything about this because of his base. Yeah. He can't afford to lose any of his base, so he's not going to do anything about gun control from now till the next election.
The Democrats in the House of Representatives actually passed gun control legislation. It was very moderate. I mean, they actually passed several pieces of gun legislation, and the most moderate of them closed the gun show loopholes, required mandatory background checks, and basically banned some of the high-capacity magazines and more or less big time like the AR-15s. That was it. And Mitch McConnell is sitting on that. He's refusing to allow the United States Senate to even discuss it.
I know. I'm well aware of this, and that's why I'm just not surprised that this keeps happening. It's these people take an oath to represent the Constitution and their constituents, and all they do is represent, the gun lobby, the NRA or whatever corporation is throwing money at them. Right. It's, like Jimmy Carter said on your show, dude, it's not a democracy anymore.
Yeah. Yes. Sadly, we are behaving more like an oligarchy than a democracy. I'm with you, Cliff. And that's something that we need to fix if we want to have a country that actually functions. Cliff, thank you for the call, and thanks for the update on what's happening there. I appreciate it. And our best wishes to your community and to you and your family. We'll be back right after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. On the Thom Hartmann Program in just a second.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club, we're featuring The Inner Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. It's a new book. The subtitle is How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. This is in Chapter 6, The Misconception of Meritocracy, page 161. Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London who became Foreign Secretary in Theresa May's Conservative government in 2016, was educated at Eton and Oxford. Giving the Margaret Thatcher lecture to a think tank in 2013, he articulated the view that economic equality will never be possible because some people are simply too stupid to catch up with the rest of society. Quote, whatever you may think of the value of IQ tests, it is surely relevant to a conversation about equality that as many as 16% of our species have an IQ below 85, he said. Comparing society to a box of cornflakes, he praised inequality for creating the conditions under which the brightest triumph. Quote, the harder you shake the pack, the easier it will be for some cornflakes to get to the top, end quote. Inequality, quote, is essential for the spirit of envy and keeping up with the Joneses that is, like greed, a valuable spur to economic activity. Whether or not Johnson is quite as clever a cornflake as he presumably likes to think, he certainly is not in command of the facts. Nobel Prize-winning economists, as well as the OECD and IMF, have shown how inequality, far from spurring on economic growth, leads to stagnation and instability. Social mobility is reduced where income inequality is greatest, and far from inspiring innovation, it turns out that there are actually slightly more patents granted per head of population in more equal countries. And as in the previous chapters, there's also the undeniable human cost of our fixation with keeping up with the Joneses. But Boris is far from alone in his misconceptions about the relationships between inequality and ability. The idea that people are naturally endowed with differences in ability, intelligence, or talent, and that those differences then determine how far up the social ladder they reach, is a powerful popular justification for social hierarchy. The presumption is that we live in a meritocracy in which the key to status is ability. We think of society as shaped like a pyramid. The supposition is that most people are near the bottom or only a little above it because the bulk of the population lack the special talents that we imagine people need to get to the top. The belief that differences in ability are the main influence on where people end up on the social ladder is so strong that we tend to judge everyone's personal worth, ability, and intelligence by their position in society. Nor is this confined simply to how we judge others. It also affects how people see themselves. Those at the top often believe that they're there because they are naturally endowed with plenty of the right stuff, just as many of those near the bottom think that their low status reflects a lack of ability. That picture, however, is not supported by the latest scientific evidence. First, research now shows that a very major part of what happens to people and where they end up is the result of totally unpredictable influences and occurrences amounting to pure luck. Second, aside from luck, the most important links that exist between ability and status operate in the opposite direction of that imagined by most people. Rather than different endowments of talents determining position in the hierarchy, it's much nearer the truth to say that position in the hierarchy determines abilities, interests, and talents. But let's address luck first. Whether or not we consider ourselves successful, most of us can probably look back across our own life histories and recognize the roles that luck and chance have played in getting us to where we are. We're perhaps lucky with schools or teachers, with the questions on an important exam, with some nameless person dealing with university applications, or we got on well with an interviewer when applying for a job. Perhaps a chance meeting was important, or perhaps an opportunity for promotion came up unexpectedly. Finding a life partner is just as important for our quality of life as our career or income, but we are far happier to acknowledge that chance and luck played a key role in meeting that person than we are in acknowledging luck's role in our career. No one minds mentioning the chance meeting, the circumstances that put you both at ease with each other, or the shared interest that might easily have gone unrecognized. The role of chance makes people's lives highly unpredictable. Although there are huge social class biases in social mobility, there are the same, spot on, and where are we? Over here, okay. And then there were two. Second, U.S. official overheard Sonderland's bombshell call with Trump. The first person who had told Ambassador Taylor that Sondland had this phone call with Trump the day after Trump's talk with Zelensky, saying that, yeah, it looks like the Ukrainians are on board on this, that they're, quote, ready to move forward. That first guy is being interviewed. His name is David Holmes, and he's being interviewed behind closed doors at the House of Representatives. And, it says Democrats plan to depose Holmes behind closed doors in the coming days. So, I said earlier I wasn't sure if it was going to be today or tomorrow. Maybe it'll even be after that. But now we've got the second person who appears to be Surya Jayanti, a Ukraine-based U.S. Foreign Service officer who was also apparently sitting in the booth at the restaurant with him, or at the table, or whatever it may be, and overheard this. Meanwhile, Stephen Miller. Have you ever heard of this group? This is amazing. It's called the Tanton Network's Center for Immigration Studies, CIS, Center for Immigration Studies. And apparently Stephen Miller, when he was working for Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, the senator from racism, from Alabama, the racist senator from Alabama. Apparently when Stephen Miller was working for Jeff Sessions, he sent a number of emails, at least 46 times, emails to this former Breitbart reporter, Katie McHugh, with links to and information about the Center for Immigration Studies, this right-wing group. But it's not just a right-wing group, it's a white nationalist group, at least according to this report by Gabe Ortiz over at Daily Kos. And one of the emails that he sent to this reporter for Breitbart with a link to the CIS, and he had sent them private cell phone numbers for people who worked at CIS and embargoed stuff. So he had an inside connection here with this group. He sent her this connection and this cell phone number of a top staffer and an embargoed report, and said that I hope you can help me, quote, spin a narrative where immigrants of color were not only dangerous, violent individuals, but also posed an existential threat to America. These are Stephen Miller's words. Immigrants of color are dangerous, violent, and pose an existential threat to America. CIS researchers, by the way, say that the White House has invited them into policymaking discussions. Brilliant. Miller also praised the writings, this is from Gabe Ortiz, of Jason Richwine, a CIS contributor who in 2013 was forced to resign from the Heritage Foundation after his Harvard University dissertation arguing that Latinos have lower IQs than whites was exposed. And then 5 years later, Miller seems to have become even more devoted to CIS and has brought them into the White House to work with Trump. This is astonishing. This is from an ongoing investigation by the Southern Poverty Law Center's investigative hate watch is their group. Absolutely fascinating. So anyhow, a lot on the table. We've had a lot of things to talk about today. Javon in Los Angeles. Hey, Javon, what's on your mind today? Whoa, I'm hearing a siren. Javon, are you there? Okay, I'm going to put Javon on hold. And let's see here. Luis in Chicago, or is it Lewis? Excuse me, in Chicago. Hey, Lewis, what's up? Lewis? Okay. If you are on hold or if you are listening, there is about a 10-second, 12-second, 15-second delay between you're hearing me on the telephone
and what you will hear on the radio. So if you call in, when you call in and you get put on hold, stop listening to your radio or television and start listening exclusively to your telephone. Chris in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Chris, you there?
Hey, Tom, first-time caller. How you doing?
I'm well. Thank you for calling. What's on your mind?
Hey, you guys are just talking about the shooting in Santa Clarita.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering why the press didn't talk about, on Tuesday, the Supreme Court sent back an appeal from Remington to a Connecticut lower court. It was basically the Sandy Hook parents had been trying to sue the gun manufacturer, and Remington appealed it to the Supreme Court. They sent it back, which I'm not an attorney, but I believe allows the suit to go ahead.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct, which I find fascinating. I haven't mentioned that on the air because I wanted to read the ruling first, because Congress passed a law sometime back. I mean, this is Republicans by and large, but Congress passed a law sometime back basically granting immunity to the gun manufacturers for liability. And this is a liability lawsuit. They're basically asserting that the gun manufacturers' practices, their marketing practices specifically, as I recall, put their children at risk, led directly to their children being killed.
Right.
And which seems that would collide with this law. But on the other hand, the summary of the report that I read in the New York Times yesterday, or maybe the day before yesterday, when the Supreme Court passed this thing down, did not say that the law had been overturned. So, I haven't talked about it on the air because I didn't know the details, and I want to figure out what's going on with that. But that's all I know about it, Chris.
Right.
So we'll see where it goes.
I'm a veteran, and I basically think rifles are terrific. They can get their effective range. Pistols have limited effective beyond like 40 meters.
Yeah.
I think financially is the way to go with these guys. And just like MasterCard has suspended sales to the NRA and things like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll just have to see what happens. I just thought it might be worth mentioning.
I'm with you, Chris. And this is let's not forget, this is how big tobacco got taken down too. So particularly in their practices of marketing to children. So amen. Chris, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Let's see here. Let's try Javon in Los Angeles. Hey, Javon, what's up?
Sorry about that, Mr. Hartman.
That's
Professor
okay.
Hartman. My apologies. Yeah.
It's all good.
Once again, thank you very much, Professor Hartman, the Professor of Love. I love your show. I've been listening to you for a long time.
Thanks.
So blessings, my man. Thank you.
So what's up?
So yeah, the last guest caller you had, I just want to he was a little uncomfortable. It's like, man, the people movement is where it's at. We see all our policies, the positive policies for the people's movement. Probably started from the Occupy movement. Black Lives Matter. Like all these movements are still kind of forgotten. Black Lives Matter exists in a small shell in Los Angeles. But the Occupy movement, like all these people who was like, hey man, America needs to fight for the better of people and not for its donors. And of course we're losing because they can't get money out of politics.
Right.
So I was just kind of disappointed to hear this guy say.
You're talking about Dianno Caldwell.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Just like the positive things about Trump, all the hatred that came from the Obama hope and change campaign to go back to all this hatred, or at least this blunt hatred in our nation and in our White House. Yeah. It's disturbing. And to give this guy praise, like as an Afro-American, to give this guy praise for something he's not even doing. And the policies from the people, I get it that Obama could have done a lot more personally. Right, but with that said, the people moved under him, and he didn't take the mantle from the people.
And the other problem that Obama had was that in his entire 8 years, he had a filibuster-proof Senate for 74 days.
Exactly.
And I mean,
my gosh,
that was it. Either a filibuster-proof Senate or a House of Representatives that was willing to go along. In other words, there was only 74 days when he was actually able to be effective at passing legislation. And in that 74 business days, it spanned over about 3.5 months. And during that period of time, he got Obamacare passed. He got a whole lot of really consequential Lulu Ledbetter, all kinds of stuff done. And, it was really good. Javon, great to hear from you. I hope you call again. Thank you very much for the call.
Man. I'm sorry that I'm out of breath. I'm going to meet my godson. I'm trying to meet with him. I'm juggling 2 phones. Yeah,
wonderful.
Thank you very much.
I hope you have a wonderful meeting. Javon, thanks a lot for the call. Don in Winsboro, South Carolina. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, good to talk to you.
Thank you.
My mind, yesterday I was out with my wife, so we didn't get to listen to the hearings very much, so I taped them. And when we came home around 5, I listened to some of CNN, MSNBC to see what happened. And later that night, I taped Hannity because I didn't have time to watch him. I was watching others. And I played Hannity this morning, and one half saying, terrible day for the Republicans, great for Democrats. And if you listen to Hannity last night, 100% wonderful for the Republicans.
Right.
And it's just unbelievable. And it has divided our country so horribly.
Yeah.
And,
Rupert Murdoch has built a very effective machine to support the interests of billionaire plutocrats like Donald Trump and Rupert Murdoch.
Right.
I mean,
right.
it's just very
So anyhow, I'm just concerned about that.
So you think that Fox viewers are you know, they're going to be deeper in the bag for Trump now as a result of what happened yesterday?
Right. So if the base keeps standing with the Republicans, it will be hard for the Senate to do anything. But hopefully Trump will be damaged so bad he won't be able to do much, won't be reelected.
Yeah, well, we'll see. There is discussion of a strategy that Republicans may employ to try to drag this thing out so that the Senate vote happens next spring rather than this fall or winter. And they think that if that happens, that the Democratic senators who are up for re-election will be burned by voting for, to remove Trump from office. But I'm thinking that if they are successful in pushing everything back till, February, March, April in particular, that's after many of the Republican primaries. And, one of these days I'm going to find a list of exactly when each one of the Republicans who's up for re-election's primary happens. But then they, once those Republicans have won their primaries and they no longer have to worry about their base, basically, until the general election, I think they'll feel more comfortable throwing Trump under the bus. But we'll see. We'll see. Don, thanks for the call. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
I'm great. What's up?
I haven't heard anybody approach this from this angle, and I watched the hearings, the majority of them yesterday, and the point that I want to make is that the summation that Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump, along with Sondland, were running an off-the-books covert operation in Ukraine.
In defiance of U.S. policy, yes.
Outside of U.S. policy. So basically, it is the same as Iran-Contra or similar.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Weapons for whatever, hostages.
Different. Yeah.
Right. So that was the point I wanted to make, is that although it is hearsay, with the corruption in this organization, that I think we need to look at it with eyes through a historical point of view.
If Bill Barr had not convinced George Herbert Walker Bush to pardon, all those guys, Caspar Weinberger, Ollie North, Elliot Abrams, and three other guys whose names I'm not sure I ever knew, but that shut down all the then living witnesses to Iran-Contra. If Bush hadn't made that pardon on December 24th of 1992, then Clinton hadn't come into office in January of 92 and said, we're not going to bother looking back at Iran-Contra. If instead that Lawrence Walsh, the investigator, I forget what the title was back in that day, whether it was special counsel or, they've had different titles over different times. I think it was special counsel. But if Lawrence Walsh had been, or the special prosecutor, if Lawrence Walsh had been able to pursue that, then we would probably be talking about that analogy, Randy, because, if Bush or Reagan had been impeached or even, charged with, essentially a crime. I don't know how you do that, against a president who's already out of office. But, if that had been public knowledge that these guys committed a crime, the Reagan and Bush, excuse me, then we'd be talking about that right now. But because it's not public knowledge, it's just, stuff that, some of us who were around then remember well. It's a shame because your point is really, really spot on. Randy, thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back. It's 48 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
At least one person dead, presumably a school child, in Santa Clarita, California in this shooting. We'll be back. And welcome back. Hey, Dave in Tacoma, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Yes, sir. Well, actually, Steilacoom, Washington. How are you doing there, Tom?
Good.
Enjoy your show.
Thank you.
Hey, the articles of impeachment, articles is a plural. So far, we've been hearing a lot about Ukraine, which is not really the strongest thing, not the worst crime he's done. I mean, God, don't get me started, but toxic appointments to agencies by Trump of people that are total opponents of those agencies.
Right.
Betsy DeVos.
But he's not the first person to do that. Reagan did that too.
Yeah.
And so did George W. Bush.
So this is abandonment of the Kurds, our staunch allies against
That's
ISIS.
something that I think should be impeachable, and particularly, the more it's looking more and more like it may well be that Jared Kushner gave the green light to Mohammed bin Salman, to Mr. Bonesaw, MBS, the dictator of Saudi Arabia, to abduct and murder Jamal Khashoggi, and that the Turks. That Erdogan, Turkey, has the tape of that call and that he's using it to blackmail Trump, and that he called in that blackmail yesterday. And sure enough, even Trump had some senators come and sit in the meeting. Lindsey Graham was one of them, and Lindsey Graham voted either yesterday afternoon or this morning to say, no, we're not going to have a resolution saying that we recognize the genocide of Armenian people by the Turks back in 1918 or whenever it was.
Amen to that. Plus all the, to put it politely, crotch grabbing and paying off Stormy Daniels and all that.
Yep.
If this would have been a Democrat, they would have been throwing the book at us. I think we should throw the book at Mr. Trump.
Yep.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dave. I agree.
Okay.
I really think that we should be throwing a book at him. Tom in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Good afternoon. I have a couple points I hope you cover.
Yeah, Tom, you're on a speakerphone. I'm going to put you on hold, and we'll get back to you. Sherry in Everett, Washington. Hey, Sherry, what's on your mind today?
Hello.
Hey, Sherry, what's up?
Hi. Actually, I'm from Alaska, but I just want to know.
You're in Alaska?
Yes.
Oh my. Okay. Let me change that. Where in Alaska?
Actually, Anchor Point.
Okay. Thank you. So what's on your mind?
I go regularly to Seattle, so I know that's how I know you. I've listened to you for years, and thank you for your service. I want to know simply, how do we get rid of Mitch McConnell?
Yeah, he has to be voted out of office. There's not enough time, and there's not any kind of means to impeach him or anything like that. And it would have to come from his fellow senators. That's not going to happen. There's a guy putting up billboards all over Kentucky that say Moscow Mitch, which is making him crazy. The $200 million basically bribe he took from a Ukrainian oligarch for the steel factory, aluminum factory, is starting to bite. The number one thing you could do is Google or DuckDuckGo Amy McGrath. She is the former fighter pilot who is running against Mitch McConnell. She's a Democrat. She's strong. She's progressive. She has a great background, a military background, the kind of relatively conservative life story that appeals to people in states like Kentucky. And so, go to Amy McGrath's website and help her out however you can. Sherry, thank you for the call. I appreciate your calling and listening to the program. But yeah, Mitch McConnell and Amy McGrath is giving him a run for his money right now in the polls. So, and she's got this amazing little 3-minute video on her website that'll just bring tears to your eyes. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people.
The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here with you, and Jim in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. We're dealing with a man who is a genius at branding, imaging, positioning, and stuff.
Yes.
And I think that the Democrats, the liberals, need to really focus on the imaging, the branding of kindness, or something of that ilk. I was back in 2016. I made a list of things that I would want from my leader, including compassionate, happy, smart, humble, flexible. Bernie fit all of these categories, that kind of thing. And I think that basically Americans are kind people. We have a level of kindness, and rather than fight this man on his level, let's develop our own level of branding, of positioning, for instance, with healthcare, immigration, economic equality, racism. If we started branding, we're kind people. We're the kind. We want to.
Jim, I like that. We have to do it in the context of this will keep you safe. This will make you safe. Having healthcare for all, Medicare for all, for example. There have now been 5 cases diagnosed in China of pneumonic plague. This is the old-fashioned plague that killed half of Europe in the 1300s. That plague, which was transmitted in Europe by the fleas that were on rats, that plague is now airborne. It's like the flu. And there are 2 cases in Beijing right now. The Chinese government is just freaked out about this. And we're the only advanced country in the world that doesn't have a national health care system, that therefore can't easily deal with something like an outbreak of pneumonic plague. It can be treated with antibiotics.
Underlying all that is the heart, is an emotion. Trump has captured an emotion, and we need an emotional kind of thing.
Yeah.
Safety may or may not be an emotion or not,
but the emotion that he's captured is fear and hate, and those are both are largely hate, and that's based in fear. And the only way you can counter fear is to make someone feel safe.
Rather than fight him on his level, with his meanness and his beating down, beating, we need to develop something that has more heart to it.
Yeah,
and
I think that's what Nancy Pelosi is doing. She's saying, we're trying to do good stuff with legislation. We're trying to clean up, we're trying to get some of these dangerous guns out of circulation. We're trying to get everybody health care so that everybody has good, safe protection for health care. We're trying to expand education. We're trying to give young people an opportunity to go to college, without ending up so far in debt that they can't get married or buy a house for 15 or 20 years. I get your point, and I agree with it. I think that I just don't think that saying we're Mr. Rogers is going to do it. It's going to have to be a little more sophisticated than that. But it's a good place to start.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, entitled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native American, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hartmann here with you. In a little bit, in a few minutes, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair, along with Mark Pocan of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is going to be joining us and taking calls from our listeners, taking calls from you. If you have some questions for her, feel free to give us a shout. Frank in Woodland, California. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind today?
Hey, pretty good, Tom, and thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Before I give you my point, I just wanted to mention, remember Green Acres back in the day, a long time ago?
Uh-huh.
The TV show?
Yeah.
Every time, and this is not disparaging, every time I see the president, I think to myself, remember Mr. Haney used to always sell everything he could think of to the
city slickers, yeah.
Yeah, so I swear every time I look at a guy, I go, what would that guy be? And of course, you know the answer.
Yeah.
Anyway, regarding the Fox personality, I was kind of a little bit. First thing I say, there's always going to be a Clarence Thomas. And
so you're talking about Gianna Caldwell, our guest in almost 2 hours ago?
Absolutely, and I'm a black guy. I'm African American descent, and I could appreciate the fact that if I worked every day in free speech television at the studio, I'm sure I'm not going to be pushing Fox talking points. And I say that with all due respect. He's been in that bubble for quite some time, and I just feel that like it's greater than subliminal advertising. It's like you're being constantly inundated. And,
well, Frank, the sales pitch, and I know Gianno. I know him personally. I got to know him when we were in Washington, D.C. He was a regular on my TV show, and we met socially. And he's a really decent guy. And there is this narrative, and my father used to believe this narrative, so I'm very familiar with it. My dad, died a Republican, that if you give people things, that they become dependent upon you. And if you want people to stand on their own 2 feet and claim, control of their own lives and all those things that we think of as noble things, you have to basically poke them a little bit to get them there. Now, my experience, and it makes sense, but my experience through life is that people are more likely to climb the ladder of success if they are given a lift, if they're given a net that holds them, And the evidence of this is that most of the people who are successful are people who started out in the upper middle class. I mean, really successful. And so that kind of proves it, in my opinion. But this conservative narrative that Dianno has bought into, and I think probably most Republicans have, that, and I think Dianno believes it. I think for some Republicans it's just an excuse, basically, is that we have to deprive people of health care. Otherwise, they won't try to get a job. We have to deprive them of food stamps. Otherwise, they'll never go out and work. They'll never be productive, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what's going on. I think.
I leave this last point. Look at the Marshall Plan. Look at Japan. Yep. Look at
the GI Bill.
And look at the GI Bill. Oh my gosh. So anyway, that's my point. And I'm fine talking to you. Have a great day.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Frank. Yeah, Frank is absolutely right. Helping people be successful is a whole lot more effective and efficient way to produce success with people than punishing them for not being successful. But, the Republicans are into punishing. And the Democrats are into helping, bottom line. John in Breckenridge, Michigan. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Just wanted to point out something quickly. A couple of things I wanted to ask you. First thing you said was you kept on saying pneumonic plague instead of bubonic plague.
No, it's pneumonic. It's pneumomic, as in pneumonia. It is transmissible through the air. It is the Yersinia pestis bacteria, which is, like I said, treatable by antibiotics. So it's not quite as but it's got a 95% death rate if it's not treated. But it has mutated, or it's a different form, and it's transmissible by a cough or a sneeze or by touching rather than through fleas. That's bubonic plague. So back to you, John.
Okay. Well, I got you. I learn something new from you every day. Every time I listen to you, I learn something new.
Thank you.
The second question I had was, or a comment I wanted to make was something that leads up to a question. You're probably the only person that I've heard on the radio or even on TV say that PBS has kind of lost their soul when they started going commercial. In my opinion, they lost their soul. They sold themselves out.
Well, I think it's a challenge, John. I think bigger than that is that they've started bringing these right-wing think tanks in to regularly comment on things. John, I'm sorry to cut you off, but Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is with us, and let me push the right buttons here to get her on the air. There we go. Congresswoman, welcome back to the program. Congresswoman Jayapal? Oh, my. Are you there?
Hello. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Congresswoman.
How are you?
I am well, and we are on the air. So, so thank you so much for joining us. I should say, introduce you. You represent the 7th District of Washington, the state of Washington. You're the first vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and Rep. Jayapal is your Twitter handle. And it would be really helpful if you could take us off speaker and just talk on a regular phone.
How's that?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, I ran in, so I apologize for that.
I heard, that you had some votes and things.
We did.
So I'm curious, what's at the top of your and you're with us until 45 minutes past the hour? No?
Right.
Until 2:30. Is it 2:30 or 2:45?
No, I think I can extend it because I'm 15 minutes late. So
okay,
let's do
till 2:45. Great, and there'll be a 6-minute break at the bottom of the hour that we have to take. But and so if people have questions for Congresswoman Jayapal, just give us a shout. And what's at the top of your agenda right now? What are the things that you're paying attention to in Congress and in the country, and your thoughts on what we saw yesterday in the impeachment hearings?
Well, obviously, that's the first thing I'm paying attention to is what's happening in the impeachment inquiry and the hearings. And I think what we're seeing, Tom, is just over and over again corroboration by very credible witnesses, including many who were appointed by Trump into those positions, who are talking about exactly the abuse of power that this president has wielded using government levers by asking a foreign country to dig up dirt on a political rival, get involved in the election, and his leverage for that is aid, congressionally authorized aid that the country desperately needs in order to fight the aggressors, in this case Russia, that Ukraine has been fighting. And so this abuse of power, betrayal of national security, and pure out bribery and extortion is unacceptable for somebody in the highest office. And I think that's what's come out in these hearings in multiple ways. But honestly, sometimes I tell people that the best witness testified very early directly to the American people and is the most credible of all, and that is Donald Trump. He told us he did all of this. All that we're seeing now is a mosaic being filled in with lots of colors.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary, and I've been getting calls from conservatives who've been watching Fox News who are saying, well, yesterday just proved that there's no there and everything's fine. And I'm like, you really think, like if a Democrat became president and was running for re-election and they reached out to, say, France and said, we're gonna hurt you in some way if you don't find some dirt on my opponent, that would be okay with you? And they're like, well, I guess it's fine.
Yesterday when Ambassador Taylor made exactly that point, he was asked by, I think, the council, the Democratic Council, have you ever, in your decades of service, have you ever seen anything like this? Have you ever seen a president using, his power in this way? And he said no. I mean, I think there were several moments during that hearing. I think one of the other really points that I think came out yesterday but hasn't been emphasized as much is, what is the United States' role in global affairs because of this, right? Because this is a small country, a fragile country. I'm talking about Ukraine now, a fragile country that was really depending on our aid. And we have made a position of saying we are going to help countries to move into democracies, and we're going to help these countries that are fighting, bigger aggressors. And clearly, Ukraine just became an object in this case, a manipulation, and I think it really harms our overall foreign policy as well.
Well, it has to cause any country that doesn't have, something very large to, some of our allies, Germany, France, whatnot, they're probably could withstand the kind of political pressure that Trump tried to apply on the government of Ukraine. But smaller countries all around the world have to be very concerned about how they work things out with the United States now and in the future, and that's a very troubling thing.
Yes.
So we're going to take a real quick break. We'll be right back in just a second here. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is with us. She'll be taking your calls in just a moment. She represents the 7th District of Wisconsin and is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and senior whip of the Democratic Caucus and vice-ranking member of the House Budget Committee. Jayapal.house.gov is the website. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congresswoman Jayapal will be with us in just a moment. And welcome back. Congresswoman, you're still here with us, right?
I am,
okay,
yeah, absolutely.
Great. So let's pick up some phone calls here. Joe in Cupertino, California, you're on the air with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
Congresswoman, it's a pleasure to speak with you. You're a real champion for the cause. I follow that Doctors for Universal Healthcare website that you're advocating. And my question is, HR 1384 is really well supported. I wish we could get my neighboring Congresswoman Iskow to support it. I think she has some issues with the provisions for fee-for-service, as I've read into the plan, that because of the district that we're in and the hospital in our local area being a world-class research institution, I don't think they're willing to settle for Medicare reimbursement, but that's not the issue I'm calling about. Your bill is different than Conyers' bill, which was the original. I think it's been updated, and Medicare for All 2019. Senator Sanders' bill, which is basically Medicare for All written in 2017, is a very similar, if not identical. But I'm just wondering if you, as the author or one of the authors, can explain the difference between that plan that you're offering in the House, Senator Sanders' plan that's sitting, I guess, in the Senate, and the difference between the two candidates, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren both signed off on the Senate bill, but I think they're trying to separate themselves. Can you explain to me the difference? Because I'm confused.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the question. So the difference is, John Conyers' bill 676 was a blueprint. It was about 18 pages, and it was a single payer resolution and blueprint, but it didn't lay out a full plan. So the Medicare for All Act of 2019, which is my bill in the House, H.R. 1384, is a full and complete plan for how we get from where we are to Medicare for All. And the major differences, we worked with Bernie's office, with Senator Sanders' office, as we were drafting our bill. We wanted to take the best of what the Senate had and then also add a few things that we thought were really important. The major differences are that my bill includes long-term care. Now, Bernie did not include long-term care in his. He did do something else that we did. He did take this one change that we had where we flipped the presumption from hospital-based care to community-based care, right? So if you're sick and you're living your last days of your life, we don't want you to be in an institution. We want you to be at home in community-based care or home-based care. And so Bernie did take that provision and put it in his bill, but my bill actually covers all long-term care. So that's a big one. There's another piece which is around the transition. So Bernie has a 4-year transition, and my transition is a 2-year transition, which I know some people think is very fast. John Conyers actually had a 1-year transition. I looked at a lot of data, and I decided that based on what I understood and what I had read, that actually we can do a 2-year transition, and it will prevent insurance premiums from spiking when they know they're going to go out of the marketplace for a couple of years there in the transition. The longer you have the transition, even though it sounds good, the reality is it allows insurance companies to game the system for the time that you need them to be in that marketplace. So our conclusion was we got to keep that short. And then last one, I hear the music, but we also have global budgeting in ours, which is a real cost containment system, which is not in the Senate bill.
That's great. Congresswoman, we'll be right back just on the other side of this. First, I have to read a 60-second commercial on the commercial side of this show. There will be a promotion here on the non-commercial, and then I'll be back with you. So we'll be right back. Good. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal with us. So PG&E,
Thom Hartmann here.
It costs $1 million a mile.
The Supreme Court and the betrayal of America has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The hidden history of the Supreme Court and the betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is on the line with us and taking your calls. Carol in Seattle. Carol, we're getting a lot of calls from Washington today. Carol, you're on the air with, I believe, your Congresswoman.
Yes, hello, Tom and Pramila. I live in Seattle, and Seattle had a plan for homelessness from the Barbara Poppy and Associates back in 2016, and the city has kind of ignored their own plan. So I would like to see that remedied so that we can all fix this issue for the region and therefore the nation.
Your thoughts, Congresswoman?
Yeah, thanks, Carol. You know, this issue of homelessness is just so huge across the country. And in the next week or two, a group of us, including Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, me, 6 of us are going to release a package that is around a basic homes guarantee. And we are really excited about this. It sort of redefines the way that the feds think about our responsibility to affordable housing and addressing homelessness. And, you know, in the past, the federal government has just sort of passed money down, right? We put money into the Housing Trust Fund, and then we send it down to the regions and we say, okay, you guys come up with how to spend the money and how to deal with your own housing issues. But we need to do more than that. I mean, the feds also do more than that. I shouldn't be so blithe about it. We also have Section 8 vouchers and things like that. But we need to do more than that. And so we're going to put out a plan that I think really gets at how do we address the affordable housing crisis. And then also we have some other areas around homelessness, from tackling opioids, mental health, all of those issues that we're also strengthening. But I think that this is something where I've been trying to work both with the localities, the county, the state, but then also try to really shift how we think about the federal government's responsibility in dealing with this crisis that is plaguing all of us across the country.
That's great stuff. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
Hi, Congressman. I wanted to talk about the Medicare for All bill that you have presented to Congress. I think you have 118 co-sponsors or so.
119, Paul. We're getting there.
Oh, and you're counting. Good. I certainly would like to see more. I know that there's a Social Security bill with a congressman from Connecticut. He has over 200 people. What can we do around the country to get the Congress people who I think, you know, they're busy, they might not like this part or that part of the book. What can we do to get people to get on board from your perspective?
Oh, it's such a great question to ask a community organizer, which is exactly what I am before coming to Congress. So we need to, first of all, you know, everybody who's listening should check and see whether your Congress member is on the bill already. And you can do that by going to the website, and I'm sure just Google Medicare for All sponsors, co-sponsors, and you'll find the list. Check and see if your Congress member is on that list. If not, then get your group of friends together. There are a whole coalition of organizations that are listed on the Public Citizen website as well that you can hook up with, and go and visit your Congress member. There are resources on that website. Our office is happy to help with resources so that whatever questions your Congress member may have, you can answer them or you can help get the answers to them, and then I can also work with them on the inside. But this is really about pushing back on the hundreds of millions of dollars that for-profit pharmaceutical companies and for-profit insurance companies are spending because they know that they have a really good thing going and they don't want it to end because they have been putting profits over patients' health for a long time. And so they're pouring money in right now to make it seem like this is not a popular idea or it's not feasible or it's naive. Well, let me tell you something. This is one of the most resilient ideas because every American understands the healthcare crisis we're in, and they are ready for Medicare for All. They just need leaders to help lead, and that's what I'm so proud to do in Congress.
There you go. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is on the line with us taking your calls. We have a 6-minute break here at the bottom of the hour, and then after that, she'll pick up calls for another 10 minutes or so. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with your calls for Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club, we're featuring The Inner Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. It's a new book. The subtitle is How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. This is in Chapter 6, The Misconception of Meritocracy, page 161. Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London who became Foreign Secretary in Theresa May's Conservative government in 2016, was educated at Eton and Oxford.
Giving the Margaret Thatcher lecture to a think tank in 2013, he articulated the view that economic equality will never be possible because some people are simply too stupid to catch up with the rest of society. Quote, whatever you may think of the value of IQ tests, it is surely relevant to a conversation about equality that as many as 16% of our species have an IQ below 85, he said. Comparing society to a box of cornflakes, he praised inequality for creating the conditions under which the brightest triumph. Quote, the harder you shake the pack, the easier it will be for some cornflakes to get to the top, end quote. Inequality, quote, is essential for the spirit of envy and keeping up with the Joneses that is, like greed, a valuable spur to economic activity. Whether or not Johnson is quite as clever a cornflake as he presumably likes to think, he certainly is not in command of the facts. Nobel Prize-winning economists, as well as the OECD and IMF, have shown how inequality, far from spurring on economic growth, leads to stagnation and instability. Social mobility is reduced where income inequality is greatest, and far from inspiring innovation, it turns out that there are actually slightly more patents granted per head of population in more equal countries. And as we've seen in the previous chapters, there's also the undeniable human cost of our fixation with keeping up with the Joneses. But Boris is far from alone in his misconceptions about the relationships between inequality and ability. The idea that people are naturally endowed with differences in ability, intelligence, or talent, and that those differences then determine how far up the social ladder they reach, is a powerful popular justification for social hierarchy. The presumption is that we live in a meritocracy in which the key to status is ability. We think of society as shaped like a pyramid. The supposition is that most people are near the bottom or only a little above it because the bulk of the population lack the special talents that we imagine people need to get to the top. The belief that differences in ability are the main influence on where people end up on the social ladder is so strong that we tend to judge everyone's personal worth, ability, and intelligence by their position in society. Nor is this confined simply to how we judge others. It also affects how people see themselves. Those at the top often believe that they're there because they are naturally endowed with plenty of the right stuff, just as many of those near the bottom think that their low status reflects a lack of ability. That picture, however, is not supported by the latest scientific evidence. First, research now shows that a very major part of what happens to people and where they end up is the result of totally unpredictable influences and occurrences amounting to pure luck. Second, aside from luck, the most important links that exist between ability and status operate in the opposite direction of that imagined by most people. Rather than different endowments of talents determining position in the hierarchy, it's much nearer the truth to say that position in the hierarchy determines abilities, interests, and talents. But let's address luck first. Whether or not we consider ourselves successful, most of us can probably look back across our own life histories and recognize the roles that luck and chance have played in getting us to where we are. We're perhaps lucky with schools or teachers, with the questions on an important exam, with some nameless person dealing with university applications, or we got on well with an interviewer when applying for a job. Perhaps a chance meeting was important, or perhaps an opportunity for promotion came up unexpectedly. Finding a life partner is just as important for our quality of life as our career or income, but we are far happier to acknowledge that chance and luck played a key role in meeting that person than we are in acknowledging luck's role in our career. No one minds mentioning the chance meeting, the circumstances that put you both at ease with each other, or the shared interest that might easily have gone unrecognized. The role of chance makes people's lives highly unpredictable. Although there are huge social class biases in social mobility, there are at the same time vast numbers of people moving up or down the social ladder in ways that even the most detailed analysis of parenting and ability fail to predict. Similarly, although there are differences of perhaps 10 years in the average life expectancy of upper and lower social classes, that explains very little of the individual differences in how long people live. Inevitably, some rich people will die young, and some people live in poverty to a great age. And as some public health mavericks used to say, even if you exercised, ate healthy, and didn't smoke, your most likely cause of death was still heart disease. In addition to all this, there may be a large element of chance in whatever our experiences, including subjective experiences, trigger the kind of epigenetic changes affecting subsequent development that we discussed in the last chapter. Just as the development of weather systems is sometimes said to be so chaotic it can be changed by the flapping of a butterfly's wings, so what amounts to chance events at the social or the cellular level are now thought to play a very substantial part in our lives. So much so, the scientists have worried that if random chance and luck are such important determinants of whether or not an individual becomes sick, gets good exam results, or has a good marriage, it becomes difficult to understand causal pathways at all and to do anything about preventing or remedying bad outcomes. The book, The Inner Level by Wilkinson and Pickett. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal taking your calls for the next roughly 10 minutes. You're still with us, Congresswoman?
I sure am.
Okay, great. Steve in New Boston, Michigan, you're on the air with Congresswoman Jayapal.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Tom. I have a question today. Do we not have laws on the books that protect the identities from whistleblowers for obvious reasons that these people would need protection?
We thank you for the question. We absolutely do. It is a crime to out whistleblowers, and what's so interesting is that people are really reacting to the president sort of trying to target the whistleblower. We have literally decided not to bring in the whistleblower. In part because we have no confidence that the Republicans and the president will protect the identity of that whistleblower and also not cause serious harm in some way, by outing him. But the other, of course, is that now we've got so much evidence that's piled up that's all corroborated the whistleblower's account that we don't need the whistleblower to testify. But you're right that we do have laws on the books, and it is really outrageous that the president and some members of the Republican Party seem willing to target this whistleblower for doing exactly what they were supposed to do. And don't forget that the Inspector General actually said that the whistleblower's report was very credible. And when it was released, if you read the thing, you could see this is not just some casual person making a casual comment. This is a seriously researched, thoughtful, detailed, structured whistleblower report.
Josh in Virginia Beach, Virginia. You're on the air with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
Hi, Congressman Jayapal. Sorry.
Jayapal. No, it's good. It's good. It's hard.
Thank you. So I'm calling because things like Medicare for All really need a bottom-up political revolution. A whole lot of Bernie-crats, elected to offices at all levels of government. And right now filing periods are here for these candidates to run. And I don't really see a whole lot of progressives encouraging others to run to get on the ballot at this time of the year. And I know Bernie's running for president, so he's really not doing a whole lot of that explicit encouragement like he used to. A lot of the online groups, Facebook groups, are sort of all talking about national topics. So my question to you is, how can we, make this a viral topic, to encourage each other to run for offices all over the country at all levels for bottom-up political revolution in 2020?
It is so important, and I would argue that it's actually happening, and we need to continue to do it. But look at Virginia, right? I mean, this is a state where we elected bottom-up progressives to change the state legislature completely, including the first Muslim American woman in the legislature, the first Indian American, the first trans, and now, because of that, we just passed in Judiciary Committee a bill that extends the deadline to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment and put women's equal rights into the Constitution. That would not have happened without the grassroots movement of people running that probably were told at some point, like I was, that you shouldn't run for office and that you can't get elected. And so it's been really great. In Washington State, in my state, I was the only woman of color in the state Senate. When I went to Congress, I actually worked to recruit and help to win the first Latina woman who took my place. And since then, we've elected a bunch of progressives, community organizers and progressives into the state legislature, and we flipped both chambers now. So I do think it's happening, but you're absolutely right that we have to keep it a focus. It can't just be about the federal government. It has to be about local, even school boards, right? We have to get all the way down into every level of government and continue that bottom-up revolution, grassroots movement to get the kinds of progressive ideas that are going to change the character of inequality and injustice in this country.
Josh in Wisconsin. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Yeah. Thank you for taking my call, Tom. And thank you for appearing, Congresswoman Jayapal. I was wondering if you thought that there were any sort of government actions that could be taken. I wanted to thank you for backing Medicare for All, first of all. But are there any government actions that could be taken to help quell the media frenzy at times of school shootings and mass shootings?
Oh, I know. Thank you for the question. We just got word of the Clarita shooting this morning. We have taken, the Democratic majority since we got in, we've passed 3 gun reform bills, including closing background checks, or increasing background checks and closing gun loopholes. And we just had a hearing in the Judiciary Committee on the assault weapons ban. We have passed 3 bills, sent them to the Senate, which I call the graveyard where all good ideas go to die, because Mitch McConnell won't take up any of these, and it's all because of money in politics. Like the NRA, it has put so much money into buying Republicans, votes that people aren't even willing to recognize that gun violence is a public health crisis. We have to treat it that way. We have to fund research into gun violence, and we have to get these guns off the streets and put in safe safety requirements. I have a bill right now that I just introduced with Elliot Engel around safe storage of guns. This is something that was actually done in one of our local cities in Washington State. We've taken that to the federal level and said, listen, you can have your gun, but you got to store it safely. So there are just so many pieces here, and it's just heartbreaking because it does not need to be the reality that we wake up every day or every week to a new shooting. It's just outrageous, and it is complete disregard for the people of this country when Republicans refuse to move these pieces of legislation.
It's amazing that we mandate child safety caps on prescriptions, but not trigger guards, trigger locks
exactly.
on guns, and so many children every year are killed accidentally by guns that they found in their parents' bedroom or something. Paul in Woodinville, Washington, you're on the air with Congresswoman Jayapal.
Yes, I'd like to go back to the whistleblower. One of the things in Devin Nunes' opening statement, and which was reiterated later in the afternoon by Jim Jordan, that they want to interview the whistleblower and get testimony. And what is gone off the rails here, and the Republicans, including Kellyanne Conway, have said that Donald Trump and the Republicans have a right to face their accuser. Well, I have to point out, the whistleblower is not the accuser.
That's right.
Neither were either of the witnesses yesterday. The accuser is the House of Representatives of the United States. And whether the Republicans like it or not, they're in the minority. They may not have voted for that, but that does not make them the de facto public defenders of Donald Trump. And in terms of outing the whistleblower, Tom, Lars Larson blurted out a name yesterday on his radio show. Lars Larson.
Yeah, he did it on Fox News the day before that. Let's not give him any more publicity, Paul.
No, I'm just saying.
But I get your point. So you want the Congresswoman to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. The Republicans started off by demeaning and trying to destroy the credibility of the whistleblower. They basically said, oh, this person doesn't know anything. They're not credible. We're not going to listen to the Inspector General who says they're credible. And then when that didn't work, then and they started seeing all this other evidence, and they started to put up this other straw man, right? You haven't brought the whistleblower to testify. Well, why do you need the whistleblower to testify? You said that the whistleblower wasn't credible. You tried to destroy their credibility. Now you're saying you want them to testify, but guess what? So many other people have testified that we don't need the whistleblower to testify. And I thought Peter Welch had a great moment yesterday where I think Jim Jordan on the other side said something like, let's bring in the person who started it all. And Peter Welch, a Democrat from Vermont, said, yeah, let's bring in the person who started it all. I'd love to see Donald Trump testify. So I think that is the point here. This is the information is damning, but what is really damning is the president's behavior. And that's what we have to keep going back to. And we can't get pulled off track by red herrings that the Republicans try to throw out or rabbit holes that they try to go down.
Yeah, amen. I know that you had to run at 45 minutes past the hour, which is just about now. So I want to thank you so much for being with us today and taking people's calls.
Well, thank you. I always love being on your show, Tom, and I appreciate everything that you do to educate the public on so many important issues.
My pleasure. And thank you again for being with us. And
Yeah,
for the great work you're doing. The Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, her website is Jayapal, jayapal.house.gov, and you can tweet her at Rep Jayapal, Jayapal. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with, actually, I got some science news for you, and then we'll pick up some more of your calls right after this, but just for me now. Okay, and welcome back. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today? Sorry, I'm not Pramila Jayapal. I know that you called to talk to her, but will I do?
I'll shape my question for you.
Okay.
First, I want to say that before I get to the question that, John Dean famously said to Nixon that Watergate was a cancer growing on the presidency.
Yeah.
I would update that to say that the Trump administration is a cancer growing on our democracy and the rule of law.
I would agree with that.
So, okay. But the thing I was going to ask the Congresswoman that, we talk about it on your show, but it isn't getting too much national coverage, and I think it's the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to election meddling, and that's the fundamental insecurity of voting electronically. And I was going to ask her if she would introduce an amendment to H.R. 1 that would require every state to mail out ballots to every registered voter. And, we do that here in Oregon, and they do that in Washington, her state as well. But I was listening to a segment on Democracy Now! Recently, Tom, and they were interviewing the Secretary of State for Colorado. So they do the same thing in Colorado. They mail out ballots to everybody. But if you want to show up on Election Day and vote at a polling place, you can also do that. So they've really increased their voter turnout. I think it's one of the highest in the nation, probably.
So you don't have to ask for an absentee ballot or do any kind of song and dance. If you're a registered voter, you automatically get a ballot by mail in Colorado now.
Exactly.
I did not know that. That's great.
Yeah, and then, you also have the option if you want to vote the old-fashioned way and show up at a polling place on Election Day, you can do it that way too.
Right.
But not only does getting a ballot out to everybody tremendously increase voter accessibility and turnout, but, having the hand-marked paper ballots, which we talk about all the time on your show, I think that would drastically increase the election integrity. And as you pointed out, we need to hand count. You point this out a lot. We need to hand count these paper ballots, not run them through scanning machines either.
Yeah, and in Colorado, what are the proportions of people who are mailing ballots in versus showing up at the polls now that they've changed this?
You know, I don't know if that question was asked, and if it was, I don't remember.
Yeah. That would be fascinating to find out, you know, if most people are suddenly shifting to vote by mail. I mean, living here in Oregon, it's so convenient. When I lived in D.C., I had to go stand in line and, you know, go find the precinct, and it was a local school. You know, a whole song and dance, and now it's just, hey, I get this thing in the mail, I read the voter guide, I fill it out, I mail it back in. Instant, easy.
It really lets people vote in an informed way. As you say, you can study the ballot.
Is Colorado the only state that does that, to the best of your knowledge, Jeff?
To the best of my knowledge, it is, Tom. And you know, it might be a little more palatable to present it on a national level because you're still giving people that option of the polling place if that's what they prefer to do.
Yeah, because you know, for some people, that's a social event, and or has become one. Jeff, thank you for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be back in just a moment. We've got what you need to know about science right after this. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and you need to know this. There's a new report out about insect declines and why they matter, and the insect apocalypse, it turns out, could have a substantial, profound, and terrible impact on literally all life on Earth, including human life. This is a human-caused insect apocalypse. Insects, just first of all, how important are they? This new report that just came out from the Wildlife Trust in the United Kingdom and authored by University of Sussex biologist Professor Dave Goulson, one of the UK's leading ecologists, is called Insect Declines and Why They Matter. And in that, he notes that insects make up the bulk of known species on Earth. They are integral to the functioning of terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. They perform vital roles like pollinating, seed dispersal, and nutrient cycling. And they're also food for numerous larger animals, including birds, bats, fish, amphibians, and lizards. The abundance of insects may have fallen by 50% or more just since 1970. If insect declines are not halted, he notes, terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems will collapse. 41% of the planet's 5 million insect species are, quote, threatened with extinction. 23 bee and flower visiting wasp species have gone extinct in the UK. This was a UK-based study. 2/3 of the crop types now grown by humans require these pollinators. The number of insecticide, pesticide applications has approximately doubled over the past 25 years. Honey sample surveys around the world show that 75% contain bee-killing neonicotinoid insecticides. The UK populations of birds that live on insects are collapsing right now. The spotted flycatcher has fallen by 93% since 1967. Other birds, the gray partridge, 92% collapse in this bird species. 93% collapse among the nightingales. The cuckoo is 77% down. The red-backed shrike, a specialist predator of large insects, went extinct in the UK in the 1990s. What we need to do is start really clamping down on the use of bee-killing pesticides, not just bee, pollinator-killing pesticides, and start basically respecting our environment. And also the climate crisis seems to be playing a role in this too, so we need to get that under control as well. Anyhow, an awful lot of stuff on the news. Linda in Bellevue, Washington, or Everett, Washington. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
I'm in Medina, Washington.
Oh, Medina. Okay.
Oh, great.
Close enough.
Yeah, I have an urgent need to know. I had 2 workers at my house yesterday who told me that Kshama Sawant in Seattle regained her seat in the city council by
she kept her seat.
Yes, she kept it by her and her workers going around to the homeless camps in the Seattle area and getting ballots to vote with, and then also by going around to the illegal immigrant or whatever these people were calling them.
I guarantee you, Linda,
population.
that no candidate, no Democratic candidate, actually, she's a socialist. No candidate is doing that, and that did not happen. It's just that this is the kind of stuff that comes out. The kind of slurs that come from this is just a genuine tragedy to even hear that. I mean, it's just incredible. Corey in Bellingham. Hey, Corey, what's up?
I'm actually in Seattle. I was pleased to hear my congresswoman on the line when I tuned in. Anyways, I just wanted to throw out a Republican talking point I heard on Ben Shapiro's show yesterday. He says that the law protects the whistleblower's job, but not the identity of the whistleblower. So
not true.
I was just curious if anybody knew the real. Well, I didn't think so, but I mean.
What do you expect from a right-wing crank? Corey, thank you for the call. Vince in Hampton, Virginia. Hey, Vince, what's up?
Yes, we Dems need to learn how to brand. I heard a guy call earlier. But when we try to give sort of advice, I feel like we're so elite we don't take it. Republicans brand everything great, like the Patriot Act. It was totally not patriotic, but it's the Patriot Act. Obama named the health care of the Affordable Care Act ACC. The GOP. ACA, the GOP named it Obamacare, which was a better name. And it was meant as a slur, and we rolled with it, right?
Yeah.
What we need to do is this scandal, this Ukrainian scandal, doesn't even have a name. We haven't even branded it. And I keep saying we need to call it the perfect call. And if we did...
You and I had this conversation last week, as I recall. I don't think that calling it perfect is going to be an effective brand. I think it should be called something like Extortion Gate or Bribery Gate.
Well, see, Tom, you just did exactly what I said. And the reason why it would have worked is
extortion and bribery are a lot worse than perfect. I know Trump is saying it's the perfect call, but I think that, if you've got to go through 2 steps of logic to understand a brand, it's not a true brand.
Just hear me out. Just remember one quick second. If we kept focusing on the perfect call, we wouldn't have to worry about these people being 3 or 4 people removed. We would say the perfect call is the witness.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Vince, I mean, that perfect call is where Trump clearly committed a crime, where he just came right out and committed extortion right in front of us, which is pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. There is going to be Maria Yanukovych, that's not her last name. Close to that. Well, maybe I'm pretty sure I have it wrong. But in any case, our former ambassador to Ukraine is going to be testifying tomorrow. So we'll see if we interrupt the program or not. But anyhow, tune in tomorrow. We'll be back here. And don't forget, get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Hello, I'm Casey Hobbs.
And I'm Shane Mason, and we're the hosts of Nurse Talk Radio.
Here's what we're talking about this week.
Casey, our next guest lives to find stories and information that we usually don't find in the mainstream media. Donna Shaw is an investigative reporter for Tarbell. In the era of so-called fake news, it is critical to know